Chanel Cosmetics is enormous, one of the biggest moneymakers in the industry and has been for literally 100 years. But their history is flooded with anti-Semitism, Nazi pandering, and some very underhanded business moves. So why is it more successful today than ever before? Chanel was an already well-known name in fashion when she began considering a perfume in 1919. She had recently launched her couture line, had a successful ready-to-wear line, and a successful millinery business as well. So she was looking for a way to add value to her already successful business for her many clients, and a perfume was the perfect way to do that. Coco Chanel commissioned perfumer Ernest Beau to create a perfume for the Chanel fashion house as this gift with purchase that customers were not able to buy otherwise. But because it was meant to be a gift with purchase, neither of them would have had any idea that it would go on to have the ridiculous impact that it has today. So for this reason, Beau used his previous work of Raleigh Le Numero Uno and Raleigh Le Gardenia, two perfumes that were offered to Chanel before this, as a base for his new commission. Chanel was well aware of these two perfumes as well, having been introduced to both of these by Dmitry Pavlovich. He created several options for the businesswoman, but her favorite was sample number 5, which is where it gets its iconic name. So, with the perfume now in hand, Chanel was gifting it to her most loyal clients as a Christmas gift in 1921, but as time went on, more and more women enjoyed the scent, asked about the fragrance, and so number 5's popularity prompted Chanel to offer it for purchase in 1922 on the 5th day of the 5th month, which would arguably make it one of the world's first celebrity perfumes, with Paul Poiret, another couturier, beating her to the punch in 1911, decades before Elizabeth Taylor in 1991. She planned to market it as a scarce luxury product, and would do so by hosting exclusive parties in which she literally gave bottles only to the elite, making it the most difficult perfume to get on the market, so naturally, everybody and their mother wanted it. The perfume blew up. It was extremely successful both publicly and commercially, so the profits encouraged Gabrielle Chanel to expand. But for this, she needed capital investment and, frankly, somebody that knew the industry better than she did. This she found in Pierre Wertheimer, who was a Jewish business owner of Bourjois, which was the largest cosmetics, both makeup and perfume, manufacturer in France, with corporate holdings in America because of a merger with Barbara Gould, remember that name for later, and a factory in Rochester, New York that was already successful. Together in 1922, Chanel and Wertheimer penned a deal to create Parfum Chanel, which would be 70% owned by Wertheimer, 10% owned by Chanel, and 20% owned by the man that introduced the pair, Théophile Bader, who was the owner of Galeries Lafayette and therefore also the perfume's first stockist. I looked these up and these are industry standard percentages. No one is being duped here. I just have to make that clear from this point because it's a major part of the story. They released Chanel No. 5 for global release along with a sturdier bottle because of shipping abroad in 1924, along with several other numbered perfumes, which I now realize while editing you can't actually read. So this is the advert and the catalogue that Chanel put out at the same time as their global release, and they were advertising Chanel No. 1, No. 2, No. 5 obviously, No. 7, No. 11, No. 14, No. 20, 21, 22 and 27, some of which have pretty much been lost to time and have full fan bases trying to discover. As time went on and Parfum Chanel began outperforming her clothing and couture lines financially, which by the way I have a full video on the Chanel fashion house on my fashion channel, which I recommend you check out if you want to know how Karl Lagerfeld saved the company from bankruptcy, so I'll be linking it here and at the end, Chanel began to be perturbed by her 10% stake in the business. She began to claim that the Wertheimers were exploiting her talents and honestly her fame, which was a major reason for such an incredible quantity of sales. She was famous and she knew that. In her mind, without the Chanel name, the perfume would be nowhere near as successful as it was, and frankly, she was right. He blew her off, telling her that he had made her a very rich woman and reminded her that it was his capital investment that got her the perfumery in the first place, as well as financing all of the production, marketing and distribution while allowing her to simply collect checks. Effectively, this was a licensing agreement as Chanel had literally no involvement with the business whatsoever, only lending her name and logo to the venture, which meant that the products that she developed would be licensed, but should the formula change or they develop new products, it would be technically private labeled as she had truly zero input into the company. Chanel never forgot this and was forced to sit back and watch the company expand over many years, in which time they produced many products which were very likely repackaged Barbara Good products, remember that name from before, including a makeup line in 1924 which consisted of face powders and lip colors, a soap, the perfume Cuir de Russe in 1924, Gardenia in 1925, Roi d'Ile in 1926, their first skincare line in 1927, Glamour, a USA exclusive in 1934, as well as the new Chanel cleansing cream, which I couldn't find an original image of, in 1934 as well. All of this before 1935, when Chanel would try to instigate a lawsuit against the Wertheimers to stop the product of cream being made, which obviously was unsuccessful, and even saw her getting kicked off the board of what she saw as her own company. Then, as wartime came in 1939, Chanel still didn't give up. She would actively use her Aryan position and frankly her fame as a white, successful woman to try to get control over the business that rightfully and legally wasn't hers. You see, the Wertheimers were Jewish, and in May 1941, Chanel used her position to petition German officials to seize sole ownership of the business with forged ownership papers. However, knowing that Chanel was vehemently anti-Semitic even well before the war, the Wertheimers anticipated that she would do something like this, especially now that the Wertheimers were away from the business. The Wertheimers had had to flee Europe because obviously being Jewish they had heard of the incoming Nazi threat and luckily had the money to escape in 1940 to New York, which Chanel was acutely aware of. However, what they had not revealed to Chanel was that before they fled, they had legally turned control of Parfum Chanel, along with their other assets, over to a Christian French businessman and industrialist, Félix Amiot. Coco Chanel, meanwhile, was a Nazi during the war, and was well known to be a collaborator to the Nazis because she was already anti-Semitic and homophobic, and it suited her desires. She would actively run missions around Europe to recruit new agents for the Third Reich, and she was a well-established spy with the codename Westminster. It was her position in the Nazi Party that she leveraged to try to seize control of the company, but after finding out that it was in the hands of Amiot, there was nothing the Nazis could do. Effectively, the Nazis got into power because they promoted themselves as a Christian group. Germany was very largely Christian at the time, with Jews making up less than 1% of the population. So they leveraged this to push their ideas as Christian, in quotes, ideals to get the German population on board and be anti-Semitic. Obviously today they are not considered a Christian group, it's just that they took advantage of Christian people in Germany by promoting themselves as Christian to gain power. So they could not lose this fake Christian sheen that they had by shutting down Christian companies, and that is why they had to leave Chanel alone to save face, especially if it was owned by a white man who had higher connections in the Nazi Party than Chanel herself. So Chanel failed at getting her company back and was, as the war came to an end, arrested for her involvement. However, she ended up pardoned for her alleged political friendship with Winston Churchill and ended up being exiled to Switzerland with her Nazi boyfriend because she was so widely hated by the French, directly because she was well known for her Nazi involvement and treason. In this time, in Chanel's post-war exile period, Pierre Wertheimer returned to Paris and regained formal administrative control of his family's business holdings, including control of Parfum Chanel, which sounds good, but in the wake of the war, the now-known Nazi Coco Chanel was widely disliked, so the perfumes that bore her name weren't anywhere near the cash cow that they once were. Especially considering that he had been selling literally millions of bottles of Chanel No.5 in America without Coco's knowledge, while paying her far less than the 10% she was owed. She learned this too at the end of the war and was absolutely furious. Therefore, in Switzerland, Chanel continued to try to regain control of her perfume business by establishing a perfumery of her own to rival Parfum Chanel, where she would sell her own Chanel-branded perfumes like Mademoiselle Chanel No.5. This obviously threatened the sales of Parfum Chanel, and the commercial rights of the Wertheimers were infringed. They took her to court and won an immediate injunction, which I had to look up is a temporary restraining order, as an emergency injunction helps to ensure the individual requesting the injunctive relief is protected from the actions of the other party. So effectively, they were able to then go to the Chanel stores and seize every bottle of Mademoiselle Chanel No.5 from her shop that was still technically open in Paris, though it only sold perfumes at this time. From here, it was anticipated that a long legal battle would ensue. But the Wertheimers didn't want this. The Western world was still very widely anti-Semitic in these days, even post-war, so it wasn't a viable option to publicly announce that she had almost no influence in the business, because that would out the company for being Jewish-owned, likely tanking sales even more. This brings us to 1947, when out of court, Wertheimer and Chanel actually did renegotiate their contract, with Chanel still in Switzerland. She was paid $400,000 in cash, which is $5.3 million in today's money, that were her rightful percentage of the American wartime sales, a monthly wage, and she would receive a 2% running royalty from world sales. The perfume she had made in Switzerland would still be manufactured and sold in Switzerland under the Mademoiselle Chanel name, just without the number 5 at the end, and she could make more perfumes if she wanted, though she never did. Instead, Chanel closed her Swiss factory and sold full rights to the Coco Chanel name to the Wertheimers, meaning that they could now license out the name or make new products in whichever markets they saw as profitable, which included refinancing her fashion and couture houses to bring her back to fashion, something they did to add value to their perfume line, but ultimately, her return to fashion, at least at first, was a flop, directly because she was so hated as a Nazi post-war, and ended up with Chanel No.5 on sale in common drugstores, heavily cheapening the Chanel brand image, though still keeping it profitable. By 1955, Chanel released its first men's perfume, Pour Monsieur, and with that failing to revitalize the business, Pierre and Coco renegotiated their contract for the last time. In this new contract, upon her death, everything would go to the Wertheimers, fashion and cosmetics together, but in exchange, she would effectively live on their dime for the rest of her life. With this negotiated, in 1957, Pierre Wertheimer bought Theodore Bader's 20% stake in Parfum Chanel and increased his share of the company to 90%. However, just 3 years later, in 1963, Pierre Wertheimer would pass away, leaving his ownership of the business to Jacques Wertheimer, his son, who had absolutely no interest in the business whatsoever, leaving sales to completely stagnate at this point, all up until Gabrielle Chanel's death in 1971, which ended up leaving 100% of the company to Jacques Wertheimer, a man that simply did not care about the company. By 3 years later, in 1974, Chanel was all but dead. Only the perfume line and the original shop on Rue Cambon remained. At least that was until Jacques' son, Alain, a 25-year-old who barely knew Coco himself, convinced the board of trustees to let him and his brother take over the company to save their dying business. Together with Gerard Wertheimer, they reduced the locations one could buy the Chanel No.5 perfume from 18,000 retail outlets just to 12,000 to create scarcity. And they invested millions of dollars in advertising, which you may have seen some of these from Richard Avedon, but it also included TV advertisements and enlisted the use of celebrity endorsement, including Marilyn Monroe. This specifically was designed to drive demand with the aforementioned scarcity to make the product look like a luxury once again. Though interestingly, they were still using the Barbara Gould products that I mentioned twice before as a base for their formulas. This coincided with the hiring of Karl Lagerfeld, who was brought on to head the fashion side of the business, further improving the brand's public perception and driving demand, effectively causing the brand's revival to what I'm calling Chanel 2.0. They were obviously very successful in this marketing plan and released several fragrances and products within this timeframe, including Cristal in 1974, repopularizing the makeup line shortly after and then hiring Jacques Polge in 1978. They released Antaeus for Men in 1981, Coco in 1984, Egoist Parfum in 1990, Pour Monsieur Concentré in 1991, Cristal Parfum in 1994, Allure in 1996, Allure Homme in 1998, and the skincare line Précision in 1999. I actually wanted to focus in on Précision at this time of the video because it was one of the many skincare lines launched by major fashion houses in the 90s when the luxury market saw this as a profitable area. But Chanel is really the only one created by a major fashion house that has still continued to this day to enjoy significant market share. This was attributed, yes, to the chemical quality of their products, which was something Chanel 2.0 had become known for in their makeup and perfume lines as well, but also in the technical evolutions in the stores. Luckily for me, scripting this video, both the quality and the evolution in technology were symbiotic. Chanel's retail innovations really began in 1991 with the founding of the Centre de Recherche et Investigation Hyperthermique Sensorielle, or series for short. Terribly sorry about my French. It was the research done in this lab that brought them to technical in-store developments as well as a more thorough and medically reviewed look into their skincare research, meaning that both they could make the best products on the market but also allowed them to partake in experiential marketing by checking the different types of skin in stores by 1999. This would both help find the scientifically best series of products for the customer individually and personalize the shopping experience to make the customer the most satisfied they could possibly be. But it didn't stop there. In 2001, the creative directors of cosmetics, Dominique Moncourtois and Heidi Morowitz, debuted what they called Miroir Lumière in Itazan department store in Tokyo's Shinjuku. Miroir Lumière was a mirror that allowed customers to see their makeup in different forms of light. They had settings for dusk, morning, fluorescent, and afternoon light, all of which could be changed with the retail assistant present to help customers understand how they could change their makeup throughout the day or for different occasions. Not only did this help customers understand the product in the short term, but it ultimately helped the customer satisfaction in the long run, as there were no surprises, or at least reduced surprises to the products. Chanel continued with their innovation in lighting to introduce something called technical ceiling a little later, which is a particular type of light that disallowed shadows within a Chanel booth, which is why nearly all of the Chanel spaces have their own roofs, even now. It became noticeable that they really considered the retailing experience for their customers, and it undoubtedly contributed to their success within this period when so many other large fashion houses like Dior Cosmetics, who I have a video on, were struggling to win back their customers. Honestly, the luxury cosmetics industry was on a downward trend at this time, largely in thanks to the recession, which unfortunately coincided with the impending rise of beauty YouTube and, at the time, small, cheaper makeup brands that were heavily promoted by the YouTubers at the time, or a little wincy bit later. Obviously, this was still in the early stages, but Chanel knew that this would be a problem and that they needed to reinvent in order to keep their business on top. To do this, they hired the makeup artist Peter Phillips in 2008 as the creative director of cosmetics, replacing Heidi Morowitz and Dominique Moncourtois, who'd been at the helm for over 30 years. Phillips provided a real shake-up for the Chanel image that I'm calling Chanel 3.0. They became cleaner, grander, a little more mature in a way that was extremely successful with customers who really gravitated towards this new look. So much so that not only did they open their first ever freestanding store in 2009 in Tokyo that even had their own exclusive products, but they also had their biggest modern viral product, the 2009 nail polish Le Vernis in Jade, that was a huge trend throughout the year and saw similar colors come out from many brands like this one that I had from Jessica. However, less than a year after he reinvented the Chanel look so successfully, Peter Phillips left Chanel for a place at Dior Cosmetics, but stayed on in a freelance role with Chanel and in fact still works on their catwalk shows today. Actually, little changed with his departure, and this 3.0 look is still continued to be the Chanel point of view to this day, which again came to prove that consistency for Chanel would win out in the end. You see, the mid-2010s mid-tier brands that looked like a threat to luxury cosmetics earlier in the story found themselves discontinuing products, alienating their fanbase, and falling from popularity, while Chanel focused on maintaining and pleasing the customers that they had already accrued over the years, including in Asia, where Chanel still continued to dominate, which is In my opinion, the catalyst for the Boy de Chanel cosmetic line, which launched initially in 2018 in South Korea, which I believe makes this the first luxury men's makeup line from a major fashion house, though I could be wrong. Somebody please correct me in the comments if I am. So today, Chanel has products in most sectors, and much like their fashion, little has actually changed with their product over all these years. Chanel Cosmetics has the same consistency that I criticize in my fashion video on Chanel on that channel, but for beauty, it's been incredibly beneficial in a way that it hasn't been for fashion, especially when used in conjunction with the innovations in the retail spaces that made the shopping experience easier for the customer. Chanel Cosmetics isn't this exciting, can't wait to get your hands on it brand, but it remains consistent, reliable, trustworthy, just as Chanel had been marketing themselves as for many, many years. So it is this that welcomes a new audience while maintaining their already wide customer base. And for that reason, Chanel Cosmetics will continue to do extremely well over many years, especially if they do increase their skin color range to include darker tones, which is something that is still quite lacking in 2023. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please like and subscribe for more videos like this one, and check out my Dior Cosmetics video here or my Chanel Fashion House video on my fashion channel. Plus, if you would like to support even more, my Patreon is also linked below.